Far-right parties have made major gains in European Union parliamentary elections.
The rise of the far right across Europe and the possible threats that could end.
Violence and vitriol on the streets of the United Kingdom, targeting migrants and mosques.
For a snap parliamentary election in his country.
France is on the road to Vichy, and it appears that the rest of Europe is poised to join it. Europe is staring down the barrel of surging fascist popularity reminiscent of the lead-up to the Second World War. Populist rhetoric and strategic alliances are reshaping the political landscape, with recent elections revealing significant and unsettling shifts. This resurgent neo-fascist movement and its increasing popularity is dangerously similar to its historical analogues, and demands urgent attention. Recognizing these signs and taking decisive action is essential. In this episode, we'll take a look at what exactly is going on in Europe. But before we do, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank our channel sponsor, Aura. As you all know, we make political content here and on our other channels. Unfortunately, that means some people don't like us very much. These days, a quick Google search is all it takes to find someone's personal information. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all readily available for those who want to find it. That's why I've been using Aura to help keep my private details private. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. This not only cuts down on the amount of spam I get, but also helps keep all my accounts safe from bad actors. I'll give you a real-world example. AT&T recently revealed that over 73 million customer records, both existing and former customers, were released on the dark web. They recommended that those affected change their passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. This was a huge breach, but I don't have to worry. Aura does all of this for me. And best of all, I don't have to download a bunch of different apps just because some company couldn't keep my data secure. I value my privacy, and I'm sure you value yours. You can go to aura.com/firstthought to start your 2-week free trial, no strings attached. Try it out, and I promise you'll appreciate the peace of mind. Support the show and protect your valuable data by signing up today at the link below. Since their decimation in World War II, far-right movements in Europe have evolved, adapting their ideology and strategies to the changing political climate. Unfortunately, they've been broadly successful. This moderation has led to the notion of soft extremism, opposing democratic values without the explicit traditional racism, focusing instead on anti-Muslim rhetoric. Movements like the AfD and Pegida in Germany form the vanguard of an emerging neo-fascism, incorporating a populism that pits the people against the elites and the scapegoated other. In Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, the success of right-wing populists has been greatly influenced by mainstream parties and media, both traditional and online. The 2019 European elections saw the so-called Identity and Democracy faction secure 10.8% of the votes, a warning sign that the far-right's influence in the halls of power is growing. These neo-fascist groups seek to undermine democratic institutions, a strategy employed during the Weimar Republic period with devastating success. And it's important to understand the significant overlap of garden-variety conservatism and the extreme right. The normalization of fascist ideas in society and within more mainstream parties inevitably leads to a point of no return, where fascism's rise becomes all but inevitable. This is something we've seen before. It's something that we all supposedly agree is bad, but obviously that's not actually the case. This brings us to the 2024 French legislative elections, which featured enthusiastic and active far-right parties. The National Rally, under Marine Le Pen, has continued its strategy of normalization to gain broader appeal. Le Pen's leadership has sought to shed the party's extremist profile to maximize electoral support. Éric Zemmour's party, Reconquête, a new, belligerent far-right group, stands in contrast with its more extreme positions. Zemmour's openly pro-Russian stance has also distinguished him from the National Rally, and their willingness to state these positions allows Le Pen to play the moderate. Meanwhile, the mainstream right has shifted towards adopting the National Rally's nativist rhetoric as well as their talking points and policies. It's within this context that we need to assess the election results. After the first round of voting, there was a real fear that the National Rally would win the second round in a historic landslide. Thankfully, that didn't happen. The headlines after the vote heralded a major win for the left. The coalition they formed had done its job and prevented the National Rally from gaining a controlling majority. The radical centrist coalition won the second most seats, and to no one's surprise, they don't seem interested in an alliance with the left. Now, usually, the president would choose a prime minister from the party with the largest number of seats. which in this case is the left coalition. I say usually because the current centrist president Emmanuel Macron is very reluctant to pick someone from the left. At time of writing, Macron has rejected the current prime minister's resignation, asking him to stay on for the sake of stability, and to give him more time to choose a suitably right-wing replacement. Macron's indecision is indicative of the broader gridlock that this election has produced. Since the three largest opposing parties each hold roughly a third of the legislature, they will likely fail to deliver a functioning parliament, which, added to the drama of Macron's stubbornness, will grind the political machine to a halt. The 2024 French elections paint a worrying picture, which echoes the turmoil of Germany in 1930. The surge in support for far-right parties like the National Rally parallels the rise of the NSDAP. This growing far-right influence, fueled by societal discontent and economic uncertainty, mirrors the conditions that allowed the NSDAP to gain traction. France's left coalition and Germany's SPD each show significant left-wing presence, though France's alliance remains fragile due to its mix of far-left and social democratic factions. Centrist parties in both countries, as staunch supporters of the status quo, only serve to perpetuate the existing political order, with France's centrist bloc notably stronger than Germany's. Conservative parties like the Republicans in France and the DNVP in Germany have maintained a steady presence, reflecting the enduring appeal of traditional power structures. Liberal and regionalist factions also made their mark, though their influence was less pronounced. These similarities between Germany in 1930 and France in 2024 are more than just historical coincidences. The trends of political fragmentation and rising extremism in France today bring to mind the final year of the Weimar Republic, which suggests that unresolved systemic issues continue to drive these cyclical patterns. The far right promises simple, incoherent solutions to complex systemic problems, which end up worsening those very problems they claim to be fixing. For example, the Holocaust wasn't just an act of sadistic brutality. It was a horrifying, systematic attempt to reshape society based on twisted racial theories which were themselves created to justify a certain economic order. Fascist movements not only want a social order based on some insane mythologized past, they want to establish incredibly oppressive regimes to reverse what normal people consider societal progress. This focus on extreme measures leads to catastrophic, violent consequences. Now, let's explore their bankrupt approach to different political issues in detail. Right-wing economics relies heavily on ultranationalism and protectionism, a fancy way of saying imposing high tariffs on imports. Yet they never actually address the genuine economic challenges faced by the working class. A good example of this is Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom in the Netherlands. They use deceptive, democratic-ish rhetoric to disguise their deeper ultranationalist, xenophobic agendas, appealing to broader audiences by preying on the fear they manufacture. For example, their platform includes reducing financial contributions to the EU and reducing government spending on welfare for immigrants in particular. Wilders says that he wants to curb so-called welfare tourism, arguing that the Dutch social system should not support these mythical migrants who do not contribute economically. Of course, this caricature is pure fiction, unsupported by reality. The former imperialist powers really hate the immigrants that they themselves created. That aside, they also want a Brexit for the Netherlands they call Nexit. And if you thought it was a disaster in the UK, remember that the Netherlands shares 2 land borders with EU members, and uses the same currency as their neighbors. Separating from the EU would be catastrophic for the Netherlands. Unfortunately, EU policies over the past 2 decades have inadvertently fueled reactionary sentiments, contributing to the rise of these movements and exacerbating economic inequalities across Europe. The Party for Freedom finishing in first in parliamentary elections is a good illustration of the broader shifts occurring in Europe. The instability their policies will cause will inevitably lead to further societal division and unrest, which is good for the far right. Reactionary parties thrive on this vicious cycle, a cycle the current system is not equipped to handle. You can't vote out fascism. The exploitation of societal divisions always comes wrapped in euphemisms about cultural identity. Reactionary elements form alliances that often appear contradictory but are fundamentally characteristic of fascist opportunism. For instance, Matteo Salvini's party in Italy has aligned with Israel to gain political legitimacy despite its xenophobic stances. Strategies like welfare chauvinism redefine worthiness based on racial, national, and other identity markers specific to the context in which they find themselves. Sounds a lot like apartheid, right? This approach pits native-born citizens against immigrants. They portray the pure, chosen people as victims of a shadowy, corrupt elite. And when capitalism is facing a crisis, these reactionary elements become more attractive partners to liberals or spineless social democrats, resulting in the defunding and/or shrinking of existing welfare programs. Now, it wouldn't be a critique of the far right without talking about media manipulation. A survey by the Arab Center DC reveals something unsurprising. A majority of the Arab public perceives US media coverage as biased in favor of Israel. Obvious, right? The problem is that even though we know Western coverage is nonsense, this manipulation is extremely effective in skewing the average American's understanding of the situation. For example, American media refers to the ongoing horror in Palestine as a conflict or war, when it's actually very clearly an occupation and a genocide. This subtle manipulation of rhetoric results in public opinion being sympathetic to the disgusting actions committed by Israel. And it's not just in the US. UK media coverage of the genocide also shows significant bias, with disproportionate empathy towards the far fewer Israeli victims over Palestinian ones. Such manipulation allows the Western ruling class to more effectively spread their hateful ideology. At the moment, the only other options are the slightly less right-wing liberals or centrists. Many people mistakenly believe that these groups represent a viable alternative. That is not the case. In reality, it's the difference between name brand products and their generic competition. Same result, just different packaging and aesthetics. Let's start with economics. Policies from both far-right and liberal centrist parties often end up converging on nationalist and protectionist themes. Just as far-right parties weaponize democratic rhetoric to conceal their nationalist and xenophobic ideology, so too do liberals and centrists adopt this strategy to gain broader appeal. This approach underscores their shared tendency to prioritize short-term political gains, and favors to the ruling class, over long-term economic stability, which further destabilizes the economy and worsens inequality. Fascist political rhetoric has deeply influenced mainstream discourse and normalized extreme right-wing views. The rise of Donald Trump disrupted the notion of American exceptionalism, aligning US politics with global trends of democratic backsliding. His election on a mainstream party ticket, mirrored by Bolsonaro in Brazil, should make it clear that far-right politics are now solidly mainstream. The media's normalization of these talking points for the cliques has furthered this process, making extreme views acceptable to the public and paving the way for even more extreme rhetoric. There's also the issue of aesthetics. In the US and Europe, aesthetic choices and practices play a critical role in shaping authoritarian and populist politics. These aesthetics influence national identities, class structures, and societal norms. Digital practices, such as meme production, yes, really, are instrumental in building right-wing narratives, blending playful and violent elements to make genocide, murder, or past horrors like the Holocaust seem cool or reasonable. The marriage of aesthetics and politics underscores the importance of cultural production in the strategy of these movements. Essays in political and legal anthropology reviews show how aesthetics come together to form national identity, class perspectives, and societal norms. For example, the explosion of anti-woke content. This strategic use of aesthetics helps attract a wider audience, particularly among younger generations, solidifying their ideological indoctrination. By cultivating right-wing sympathies through aesthetics, these movements blur the line between politics and cultural representation, making their ideology more pervasive and insidious. We also touched on the right-wing's weird affinity for Israel, considering how anti-Semitic they are, so it's worth examining more closely. It may seem paradoxical that some fascist parties in Europe have become staunch supporters of Israel. Israel believes so strongly in cultivating these alliances that it's state policy. Politicians like Italy's Matteo Salvini, the UK's revolving door of prime ministers, and all US presidents since 1948 use visits to Israel to bolster their political careers. Netanyahu's government has strengthened ties with far-right groups in Europe, leveraging these relationships for political support. US support for Israel has strong-armed European governments and far-right groups alike to adopt rabid pro-Israel stances. This relationship is mutually beneficial. Far-right parties gain political legitimacy and support, while Israel secures significant backing from European countries, including Hungary, Poland, and Austria, where neo-fascist elements support Zionism despite their historical anti-Semitism. Yet another reminder that Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. This cooperation appears on the surface to be pragmatic, since they have several overlapping goals. However, it's actually ideologically driven. The main fascist motivation to support Israel so fervently is an insidious desire to promote the legitimacy of ethno-states, and in liberal systems, to justify ever more destructive racist policies. Notorious neo-Nazi Richard Spencer uses Israel's model to advocate for his own vision of an ethno-state for the nebulously defined white people. The main source of this support is from the anti-Semitic notion that Jews aren't able to integrate into other societies and should be corralled into one place. Sound familiar? Their logic is perfectly consistent. Spencer has even gone on Israeli television to declare himself a white Zionist, seeking to justify his stance by drawing parallels to Israeli nationalism. In Israel, laws favoring Jewish citizens over Palestinians provide a template for similar policies advocated by European right-wing extremists. The expansion of apartheid-inspired policies across Europe mirrors Israeli practices that reinforce their exclusionary ideology. By aligning with Israel, these fascists gain a semblance of legitimacy in the eyes of liberal society, while promoting their reactionary garbage. The alarming rise of far-right movements in Europe echoes dangerous historical precedents, threatening to repeat some of the worst atrocities ever seen, or if they get their way, outdo them. In Germany, AfD and Pegida's populist rhetoric is gaining ground. In Belgium and the Netherlands, right-wing extremists are rapidly winning real power. And in Italy, Matteo Salvini is teaming up with Israel and other far-right factions to bolster his political influence. The 2019 European elections resulted in a major rightward shift, while in France's recent elections, Le Pen's National Rally gained a historic number of seats. These are all very bad signs. As right-wing parties become more mainstream and adopt ever more extreme views, political gridlock and dysfunction will reign, paving the way for strongman fascists to seize control. Recognizing and countering these movements is critical to protecting our future, before it's too late. Episodes like this one are made possible thanks to our generous patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to help support the show, and get some great perks while you're at it, consider becoming a patron. Perks include access to our Discord server, early access to videos, ad-free episodes, and more. You can help us keep the channel afloat by becoming a patron at patreon.com/firstthought. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.